Welcome to this week's update. I'm Pav, lead market analyst here at Swyftx. This week, we're going to describe some of the sentiment that I've been seeing and feeling just in my own personal circles. I think it's pretty reflective of how the market is feeling right now. Anything from people saying that they're looking forward to Q4 being a bumper period, as we have seen Q4 in post-halving years be historically quite positive for the markets. But there's also a mix, again, 50-50 in my books, of hearing other people say that they think the market is topped. They think it's over. So I'd be interested to hear your comments as well on what you're hearing in your circles. Obviously, at the end of the day, the market really is a big group of people just trying to price in what is fair value at any given time. So I thought, as a nice little continuation of our write-up last week, which if you didn't catch, I recommend go checking it out. It's more of a macro look at the markets, really zooming out, looking at some multi-month, multi-year data points and what's changed in the industry. Now, crypto prices themselves haven't been doing too much, albeit for a few outliers. Like we can see altcoins outperforming a little bit towards the back end of this week. Some of that may be related to some inflation data out of the US coming in very well as expected, which is always good to see. But really what we're going to talk about today again is just, are we seeing just a general resetting in how the market is vibing right now in terms of prices? Because we did see quite a bit of a run up into the middle of this year, June, July being quite bumper, August being positive as well, and then that correction at the start of this month. So when we look at certain indexes, like the one down the bottom here, the euphoria index, we can start to understand how price has been behaving these last couple of months. Now, the euphoria index down the bottom, it's something I've created myself. It basically is an index from 1 to 100 that looks to blend in a bunch of global factors. So we're looking at how are altcoins performing? What is the volatility and volume we're seeing in the market? Trend and momentum, looking at Bitcoin dominance relative to the rest of the market, and even looking at other cofactors such as US dollar index performance and global liquidity as well. When is a market euphoric? That's basically what this index is trying to describe. And we can see when we have got into these range highs, so above 70 as a reading, it generally has come up towards periods where the market has seen some sort of selling off, some sort of cooling off, etc. Now, if we look at the most recent time, August, June, and July, we do see this indicator hitting above that 75 mark like we spoke about. And the most recent all-time high, we did see euphoria peak at that period. But what we have seen now in the last couple of weeks heading into September is just a general cooling off and a resetting, really coming back to a baseline. And that's what I would say is the best way to understand this euphoria index is when we are towards the middle, it's taking a breath. When we do slow down, we want to understand what comes next. Do we see the market continue to move to the upside, or are we going to see a further correction or reversal? Now, what we can also look at to tie into things here is dive into some on-chain data. Now, on-chain data, just that word alone can give a lot of people heartburn. That's understandable, but this is super, super simple. Looking at the last 12 months, with Bitcoin's price being here in black, what has been the average buy cost of anyone who's purchased Bitcoin in a previous 155 days? So this metric basically thinks of anyone that's held Bitcoin in the last 155 days as a short-term holder. They generally are most likely the ones that will potentially offload their investment for fear that they did buy the top. Well, they did buy at an inopportune time. And we can see here that the dips that we've seen this year has been underneath this cost basis for short-term holders. Again, reiterating the whole idea that this game is more of a marathon, but the longer term holders generally will be sweating less. Because you can imagine if you were a short-term holder and this was like your DCA, your average price, if that's the way you want to visualize it, every time this black line comes close to this red line, you get sweaty palms. So are people in it potentially chasing, thinking there's more upside, not seeing that upside and then selling their positions? So that's called that capitulation factor. We can turn on this little overlay to understand when those capitulation events have occurred in the past. Or are we starting to see short-term holders even ending up in the green? And that's potentially going to give them obviously just a bit of a stroke of positivity and the market could continue going higher. So that's the best way I would think about this. It's almost like a return to mean or like an average basis for anyone who's jumping into crypto. And it's a good way to visualize how emotional the market might be getting. Because again, if we look at how far away price was from the short-term holder cost price basis and how close we've gotten, it really lines up quite similarly to the euphoria index. We saw a lot of metrics in the market globally overheated, coming back to a norm. And that's basically what we're seeing again with what short-term holders are seeing. So give us that sort of correlating idea now that we're really at a point where the bulls step in. We see obviously positivity return in the market, or we see selling take over, and maybe we see a bit of more of a retrace like we have in the past here. And that's the thing, we don't have a crystal ball in these things. But what we can look at is maybe looking at Bitcoin's price through a different lens. We're used to seeing date and time and price, so looking at how Bitcoin's price has moved, in this case, in the blue line since the start of this year. But we can also look at what has been the rolling performance over a 30-day window. For example, at this peak, the most amount of gains that Bitcoin had made in a rolling 30-day period was at the 8th of May. And we can see that as the market continued to go higher, the rate of change, or the rate at which price was going higher, was actually slowing down. So we were seeing a loss of momentum is the best way to think of that. Now, what we've experienced so far to date has been a peak, let's call it 7 to 8% drop in Bitcoin's rolling 30-day performance metric. That's very akin to what we saw in the middle of this year before we saw that June rally. So again, if we're trying to understand from a positioning perspective, how big of a retrace has this been? It's very similar to what we've seen across this whole year. This whole year to date, this pullback so far is not surprising at all. And if we do start to see this basically come back to par on a 30-day rolling window point, like we spoke about, we may be seeing some sort of movement similar to April, or maybe even similar to July this year. So it really sets up this narrative of, obviously we're here now, we're heading into the back end of the year in Q4. A lot of people that may be undecided on which way the market's going, every metric says that that's exactly how you should be feeling. But it's definitely a very key point where I would expect those people who are necessarily not so confident in their positions or their reason why they're in the market, maybe to forego their positions and maybe miss out on that potential upside to come. Also, if we are going to see some potential black swan event or something outside of everyone's control, or maybe we just do see just a general de-risking in the market for whatever reason, this is also that kind of moment where we would expect that too. But again, I would relay the whole idea that next week we do have the rate cuts meeting in the US, which has been met with quite a bit of positivity. A lot of the data that's been presented this last 2 weeks that will influence that decision seems to be pointing in the right direction for those rate cuts to materialize. And basically at this point, the market's weighting that as a sure thing. So it definitely does seem to me that the emphasis is definitely for upside from here, from the market and from the data that we're seeing. But again, super understandable why we're seeing the market so 50-50. But that's it from me here this week. Catch you again next week. Thanks.